independence versus conventionality, servility, envy, hatred, and power lust. If this play's sense of life were to be verbalized, it would say, in effect, your life, your achievement, your happiness, your person are of paramount importance. Live up to your highest vision of yourself, no matter what the circumstances you might encounter. An exalted view of self-esteem is a man's most admirable quality. The springboard for the story was the collapse of Ivor Krieger, or more precisely, the public reaction to that collapse. On March 12, 1932, Ivor Krieger, the Swedish match king, committed suicide. His death was followed by the crash of the vast financial empire he had created, and by the revelation that that empire was a gigantic fraud. The whole thing was essentially a Ponzi scheme. He had been a mysterious figure, a lone wolf, celebrated as a man of genius, of unswerving determination and spectacular audacity. His fall was like an explosion that threw up a storm of dust and muck. Bjorn Faulkner, the hero, who never appears in the play, is not Ivor Krieger. He is what Ivor Krieger might have been, or perhaps ought to have been. The two sides in the play are represented, on the one hand, by Bjorn Faulkner and Karen Andre, his secretary mistress who is on trial for his murder, and on the other, by John Graham Whitfield and his daughter. The factual evidence for and against the accused is approximately balanced. The issue rests on the credibility of the witnesses. The jury has to choose which side to believe, and this depends on every juror's own personal sense of life. So aside from a few screws, I wanted to say that this entire show was put together by students. I just kind of stood back and watched it all happen. So the set, the lights, the sound, of course, the amazing acting, the t-shirts, the posters, the photographs outside, and a couple little twists in the show come from kids, from students, from your kids. And I'm really proud of them for that. They did an amazing job.
Court attention. Superior Court number 11 of the State of New York. The Honorable Judge Teresa Heath presiding.
The State of New York versus Karen Andre.
Ready, Your Honor.
Ready, Your Honor. Ms. Clerk, draw a jury.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are to be the jurors of this case. 10 of you will be picked for this duty. When drawn, you will come up here, take your seats, and receive your instructions from Judge Heath. Don Sodlow, Olivia Capson, Lori Felt, Kenzie Williams, Merle Clayton, Ashton Woods, Connie Allgood, Wendy Higgs, Chad Strasser, Caitlin Dillon.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are to be the jurors that will try this case. At its close, we will retire to the jury room and vote on a verdict. I instruct that you listen to the testimony carefully and pronounce your judgment to the best of your ability and integrity. The district attorney may now proceed.
Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, on the 16th of January, near midnight, when the lights of Broadway blazed an electric dawn over the gay crowd below, the body of a man came hurtling through space and crashed. A disfigured mess at the foot of the Faulkner building. That body belonged to Sweden's great financier, Bjorn Faulkner. He fell 50 stories from his luxurious penthouse. A suicide, we were told. A great man, unwilling to bend before his imminent ruin, A man who found the fall from the roof of a skyscraper shorter and easier than the descent from his tottering throne of the world's financial dictator. Only a few months ago, behind every big transaction of gold in the world, stood that well-known figure. Young, tall, an arrogant smile, with kingdoms and nations in the palm of one hand and a wig in the other. If gold is the world's lifeblood, then Bjorn Faulkner, holding all its dark, hidden arteries, regulating its ebb and flow, its every pulsation, was the heart of the world. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the world has just had a heart attack. And like all heart attacks, it was rather sudden. No one suspected the gigantic swindle that lay at the foundation of the Faulkner Enterprises. A few days after his death, the earth shook from the crash of his business. Thousands of investors were stricken with the paralysis which follows an attack when that monstrous heart stopped beating. Bjorn Faulkner had had a hard struggle to face in the world, but he had a much harder struggle to face in his heart, a struggle which this trial will have to uncover. 2 women ruled his life, and death. Here is one of them, ladies and gentlemen, Karen Andre, Faulkner's efficient secretary and notorious mistress. But 6 months ago, Faulkner came to America to get a loan and save his business. Fate sent him a means to save his own heart, in the person of the lovely young woman who is now his widow, Nancy Lee Faulkner, only daughter of our great philanthropist, John Graham Whitfield. Faulkner thought he had found salvation and a new life within the virtuous innocence of his young bride, and the best proof of it is that 2 weeks after his wedding, he dismissed his secretary, Karen Andre. He was through with her. But ladies and gentlemen, one is not easily through with a woman such as Karen Andre. We can only guess at what revenge and hatred smoldered in her heart. But they leapt into flames on the night of January 16th. Bjorn Faulkner did not kill himself. He was murdered. Murdered by the very delicate and capable hands which you see here before you. The hands that helped raise him high above the world. The hands that threw him down from as great a height to crash into a pavement cold as this woman's heart. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what we are going to prove. Our first witness will be Dr. Kirkland.
Dr. Kirkland? You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Kindly state your name.
Rose Kirkland,
What is your occupation?
medical examiner of this county.
In the course of your duty, what were you called upon to do on the night of January 16th?
I was called to examine the body of Bjorn Faulkner,
What did you find?
a body mangled to an extreme degree,
What did you establish as the cause of death?
a fall from a great height.
Judging by the condition of the body, could you say exactly how long it had been dead?
No, owing to the cold weather, the blood had coagulated almost immediately, making a difference of several hours impossible to detect.
Therefore, it is possible that Faulkner had been dead longer than half an hour.
It is possible.
Could his death have been caused by anything other than this fall?
I found no evidence of it.
For instance, had his skull been broken before the fall, would you be able to tell by examining his body?
No, owing to the condition of the body, it would be impossible to determine.
That's all, Doctor.
Did you find any trace of any such earlier wound in your examination of the body?
No, I did not.
Did you find any indication that death may have been caused by anything other than the fall?
No, I did not.
That is all.
John Hutchins.
John Hutchins? You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
What is your name
John Joseph Hutchins.
and your occupation?
I'm the night watchman at the Faulkner building, sir.
Did Mr. Faulkner have business offices in that building?
Yes, sir.
Do you know who owned the penthouse on the roof of that building?
Certainly, sir. Mr. Faulkner did.
And who lived there?
Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre. That is, before Mr. Faulkner's marriage.
And after the marriage?
After the marriage, Miss Andre lived there alone.
Had you ever seen Mr. Faulkner calling on Miss Andre after the marriage?
Only one, sir.
And that was?
On the night of January 16th.
Tell us about it, Mr. Hutchins.
Well, sir, it was about 10:30.
How do you know the time?
I come on duty at 10, sir, and it was no more than a half hour after. The entrance doorbell rang, and as I went to get the door, it was Miss Andre, and Mr. Faulkner was with her. I was surprised because Miss Andre has her own key, and she can usually open the door herself.
Was she alone with Mr. Faulkner?
No, sir, there were two other gentlemen with them.
Who were they?
I don't know, sir.
Had you ever seen them before?
No, sir, never.
Well, what did they look like?
They were tall and sort of slender, both of them. One had light eyes, as I remember. The other, I couldn't see his face on account of his hat being all crooked over his eyes. I think he may have had a bit too much, sir.
What do you mean?
Well, he seemed a bit tight, if I'm permitted to say so. Wasn't really steady on his feet, so that Mr. Faulkner and the other gentleman had to help him. They almost dragged him to the elevator.
Did Mr. Faulkner look worried?
No, sir. On the contrary, Mr. Faulkner seemed very happy.
Did he look like a man contemplating suicide?
Your Honor, we object.
Objection sustained.
Did the others in the party seem happy too?
Yes, sir. Miss Andre was smiling, and Mr. Faulkner laughed when they went up the elevator.
Did you see any of them leave that night?
The first one left about 15 minutes later.
Who was that?
A drunk one, sir. He come down that elevator all by himself. He wasn't so drunk no more. He could walk, but he staggered though.
Did you see where he went?
Well, I tried to help him seeing the condition he was in, but he noticed me coming and he hurried out. He got into his car parked right at the entrance and did he step on it, but I'm sure he didn't get far. The cops must have got him.
What makes you say that?
Well, sir, I saw this car that started right after he did.
What car? The defendant will please keep quiet.
If Miss Andre will let me do the questioning, I may satisfy her curiosity. I was just going to ask, what car, Mr. Hutchins?
It was a big black sedan. It was parked 2 cars away from his.
Who was in it?
I saw only one man.
What makes you think he was after the first car?
I'm not sure he was, sir. It just looks funny how they started together like that.
And then what happened?
Well, it must have been 10 minutes later, and I saw the second guest leave.
Where did he go?
Nowhere, really. He seemed to be in a bit of a hurry, and he just went right out.
And then what happened?
I started my round to the building, and then it must have been an hour later, and I heard screams coming from the streets. As I ran into the lobby, I saw Miss Andre run out the elevator, her gown torn, sobbing wild-like, and I ran after her. We pushed through the crowds in the street, and there was Mr. Faulkner, all over the pavement.
What did Miss Andre do?
She screamed and fell to her knees. It was terrible, sir. I've never seen a body smashed like that.
That's all, Mr. Hutchins.
Now, you said you had never seen Mr. Faulkner calling on Miss Andre after his marriage, with the exception of that night. Now tell me, do you always see every visitor who comes into the building at night?
Well, no, ma'am. I'm not in the lobby all the time. I have my rounds of the building to make. If a guest has a key, he can come in and I wouldn't even see him at all.
In other words, Miss Andre could have had any number of visitors, Mr. Faulkner included, whom you never saw come in?
Yes, ma'am, that is quite right.
That is all.
Homer Van Fleet.
Homer Van Fleet? You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Your name,
Homer Herbert Van Fleet,
your occupation,
Private Investigator,
what was your last assignment?
shadowing Mr. Bjorn Faulkner.
By whom were you hired to do it?
By Mrs. Bjorn Faulkner.
Were you shadowing Mr. Faulkner on the night of January 16th?
I was.
Kindly tell us about it.
I'll start with 6:13 p.m.
How do you know the time, Mr. Van Fleet?
It's part of my duties. I have to record it and report it to Mrs. Faulkner.
I see.
6:13 p.m. Mr. Faulkner leaves from Long Island, wears formal dress suit, drives by himself, alone. Special notation, unusual speed all the way to New York.
Where does Mr. Faulkner go?
He drives up to the Faulkner building. It is now 7:57. All offices closed. I wait outside in my car. 9:35 p.m. he comes up with Miss Andre. Miss Andre is dressed formally. Special notation, she's wearing a corsage of orchids of unusual proportions. They drive away.
Where do they go?
No one is perfect in this world.
What do you mean?
I mean, I lost track of them due to Mr. Faulkner's speed and to an accident.
What accident?
My left fender crashing into a truck. Damages for which charged to Mrs. Faulkner.
What did you do when you lost track of them?
I returned to the Faulkner building and waited.
When did they return?
10:30 p.m. exactly. A great group follows them. Mr. Faulkner gets out and helps Miss Andre. As she rings the bell, he opens the door and a tall gentleman in a gray coat steps out. Together they help the third gentleman, the latter wearing a dark gray sport coat. Special notation, the aforementioned gentleman shows signs of inebriation. They all go into the Faulkner building.
Then what do you do?
I go into Gary's Grill, across the street from the Faulkner building. Now, I must explain that I allow myself to take nourishment every 4 hours while on duty. In 4 hours had elapsed since the time we left Long Island. I sit at the window and watch the Faulkner entrance door.
What do you observe?
Nothing. For 15 minutes. Then the man in the gray coat comes out, starts the coupe, obviously in a hurry, drives away, south.
Did you see the other stranger leave too?
Yes. 10 minutes later, he gets in the car which stands at the curb. I'm not sure how it got there, but there he is, and he seems to have the keys, for he gets in it and drives away, south.
Have you ever seen Mr. Faulkner with these two men before?
No, first time I ever saw them.
What did you do when they left?
I wait. Mr. Faulkner is now alone in the penthouse with Miss Andre. I'm curious. Professionally. Decide to do some closer investigating. Have a special observation post. Had used it before.
And where is that?
At the Skytop nightclub. Roof of Brooks building 3 doors down from the Faulkners. There's an open gallery there off the dance floor. You go up and you can see the Faulkner penthouse as clear as the palm of your hand. I go out, I look, and I yell.
What do you see?
No lights. Karen Andre's white gown shimmering in the moonlight. She's hoisting a man's body up on parapets. A man in evening clothes. Faulkner. He's unconscious and no resistance. She pushes him with all of her strength. He goes over the parapet, down into space.
Then what do you do?
I rush into the dining room and yell what I'd seen. A crowd follows me down to the Faulkner building, and we find a bloody mess on the pavement, and Miss Andre is sobbing over it. Fit to move her. Personal audience.
Did you speak to her?
No, the police arrived and I've recalled what I've told you here.
Your witness.
Can you kindly tell us, Mr. Van Fleet, when did you start in the employ of Mrs. Faulkner?
October 13th last.
Now, can you tell us the date of Mr. and Mrs. Faulkner's wedding?
October 12th, the day before.
Exactly, just the day before. In other words, Mrs. Faulkner hired you to spy on her husband the day after their wedding?
So it seems.
What were Mrs. Faulkner's instructions when you were first hired?
To watch every action of Mr. Faulkner and report in detail.
Any special attention to Miss Andre?
Not specified.
Well, had Faulkner been calling on Miss Andre after his marriage?
Yes, frequently.
In the daytime?
Seldom.
Did you report that to Mrs. Faulkner?
I did.
When you told her this, what were her reaction?
Mrs. Faulkner is a lady. and as such, she has no reactions.
Didn't she seem worried?
I don't believe so. Mr. Faulkner was the most devoted and loved his wife dearly.
And just how do you know that?
Mrs. Faulkner's own words.
Now, Mr. Van Fleet, can you tell us exactly what time you left for the Skytop nightclub on the night of January 16th?
11:32 exactly.
How long a walk is it from the Faulkner building to the Skytop?
3 minutes.
And what time was it when you came out onto the balcony?
11:57.
So it took you exactly 25 minutes to reach the balcony. What were you doing the rest of the time?
Of course, the Skytop has a dance floor and other things.
And did you take advantage of these other things?
I had a couple of drinks. If I understand the drift of your curiosity, it does not mean that you can say I was intoxicated.
I have said nothing of the kind, as yet. Now, you said you saw Miss Andre pushing Faulkner off the roof, and it was a little distance away in the darkness, and you, well, shall we say you just had a couple of drinks?
The drinks had nothing to do with it.
Are you quite certain that she was pushing him? Isn't it possible that she was struggling with him?
Well, it's a funny way of struggling with a man. I know if I were struggling with a man, I wouldn't be hoisting him up by his... I wouldn't be hoisting him up.
Mr. Van Fleet, what were Mrs. Faulkner's instructions to you before you came here to testify?
I received no instructions of any kind. Mrs. Faulkner is not here to instruct me. Were she inclined to do so, she has been taken to California by her father to rest her shattered nerves.
Mr. Van Fleet, do you think that Mr. Faulkner's suicide is very flattering to Mrs. Faulkner?
We object.
Objection sustained.
Now, Mr. Van Fleet, can you tell us how much a witness to Mr. Faulkner's murder would be to Mrs. Faulkner?
We object, Your Honor.
Objection sustained.
I would like to inform Mrs. Stevens that she may be sued for insinuations as such as these.
I have made no insinuations at all. I merely asked a question in a general way.
Well, I would like to inform you, in a general way, that perjury is not part of a private investigator's duties.
No special notations to the rule?
None.
That's all.
Not quite. I want you to ask him 2 more questions, Stevens.
Certainly, Miss Andre. What are they? Mr. Van Fleet, what type of car do you drive?
A brown Buick coupe. Last year's model, old but serviceable.
Mr. Van Fleet, did you notice any car following the man in the gray coat as he drove away?
I cannot recall that I did. The traffic was quite heavy that day.
That is all.
Inspector Sweeney.
Inspector Sweeney. You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Name,
Elmer Sweeney,
your occupation.
Inspector of Police.
On the night of January 16th, were you called upon to investigate Bjorn Faulkner's death?
Yes, sir. I was one of the first officers to reach the spot.
Did you speak to Miss Andre?
Not right away. Before I could do anything, that fellow, Van Fleet, rushed up to me and yelled that he had seen Karen Andre throw Faulkner off the roof.
How did Miss Andre react to this?
She was stunned. She stood there, her eyes wide fit to burst, and then, across my heart, sir, she started laughing, and I thought she went crazy.
What did you do?
I ordered her to be held for questioning. We took her up with us in the elevator to examine the penthouse. What a joy.
Did you find anything unusual?
Unusual. Yes, sir. Bedroom.
And what was that?
Nightgowns, sir. Lace nightgowns, just about made of thin air. A crystal bathtub in the bathroom. We turned the water on, and the water was perfume.
You misunderstood my question, Inspector. I wasn't referring to the aesthetic values of the penthouse. I asked if you found anything unusual that could be connected with Bjorn Faulkner's death.
Yes, sir. In the living room.
And what was that?
It was a letter, lying in plain sight on a table. It was sealed and the address said, "To whomsoever finds it first."
Is this that letter?
Yes, sir.
Will you kindly read it to the jury?
If any future historian wants to record my last advice to humanity, I'll say that I found only two enjoyable things on this earth whose every door was open to me: my whip over the world and Karen Andre. To those who can use it, the advice is worth what it has cost mankind. Signed, Bjorn Faulkner.
Submitted as evidence.
Accepted as Exhibit A.
Did you question Miss Andre about this letter?
I did. She said Faulkner wrote the letter, left it there on the table, and ordered her not to touch it. Then went out to the roof garden. She struggled with him, of course, when she saw what he was going to do, but nonetheless, she couldn't stop him.
Did you ask her who had been with them that night?
I did. She said two men had, well, they were friends of Mr. Faulkner, and she had never seen them before. He picked them up that evening in a nightclub and brought them along. She said their names were Jerry White and Dick Saunders.
Did you try to find any gentlemen by these names among Mr. Faulkner's acquaintances?
I did, and I found that no one had ever heard of them.
And Miss Andre told you, as she did at the inquest, that she had never seen those two men before.
Yes, sir.
That's all.
Miss Andre told you she had struggled with Faulkner to prevent suicide. Did you notice any evidence of a struggle in her clothes?
Yes, ma'am. Her dress was torn. It had diamond shoulder straps, and one of them was broken. So she had to hold the dress up with one hand.
And what'd you think of that?
Do I have to answer?
You certainly do.
Well, I wish she had broken the other strap, too.
I meant, did you think the dress looked as though it had been torn in a struggle?
Yes, ma'am, that looked like it.
Now, can you tell us why on earth you turned the shower on in the bathroom?
Well, you see, we heard that Faulkner had wine instead of water in it.
You mustn't believe all the legends you hear about Bjorn Faulkner. That is all, Inspector.
Magda Svensson.
Magda Svensson? You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I swear.
What is your name?
You know it, you just called me.
Kindly answer my questions without argument. State your name.
Magda Svensson.
What is your occupation?
I am housekeeper.
By whom were you employed last?
By Ivor Faulkner and before that his father.
How long have you been employed by them?
I've been in the family 38 years. I know Ivor since he was a little child.
When did you come to America?
I've been here 5 years.
And what were the duties Faulkner assigned to you?
I keep penthouse for him. He visits every year or so, and he stay every year or so, but I never employed by this one.
Now, Mrs. Svensson...
Miss Svensson.
I beg your pardon. Miss Svensson. What do you know about Miss Andre's relations with Mr. Faulkner?
Decent women like me shouldn't know such things, but sin is shameless in this world.
Tell us about it, Miss Svensson.
From first day this woman arrived, she was Mr. Isabel Faulkner. It isn't a good thing when man forgets line between work and pleasure. She keep her claws tight on both. And sometimes they talk loans and dividends, and another time the office was locked and under the window shades.
Your Honor, we object.
I think Miss Andre should have objected many years ago.
Such testimony is outrageous.
These are facts pertaining to the vital question of their relationship.
Silence, ladies and gentlemen. I shall ask the witness to word her testimony more carefully.
Sin is sin, any name you call it, Judge.
Miss Svensson, do you know of any instance when Miss Andre's conduct was detrimental to Faulkner in ways other than moral?
I do so. You try to on top of money based on that woman.
Can you tell us of an instance of Faulkner's extravagance?
I tell you, he had a platinum gown made for her. Yes, I said platinum. Fine mesh, fine and soft as silk. She bought it.
Your Honor,
from
we
her.
object. Such testimony is irrelevant. It only tends to prejudice the jury against Miss Andre.
Let her talk, Stevens. Perhaps it may prejudice the jury in my favor.
Miss Stevens has my sympathy. Her client is not an easy one to handle. Did you observe Faulkner's attitude toward his marriage?
He was happy for the first time in his life. He was happy like decent man was found right road.
Do you know of anything that made him worry in those days? That could bring him to suicide eventually?
No, nothing.
Now tell us, did you observe Miss Andre's attitude toward Mr. Faulkner's marriage?
She keeps silent like stone statue. She was always
Mrs. Faulkner?
I understand you want to call me as a witness, Mr. Flint?
I did, Mrs. Faulkner, but I thought you were in California.
I was. I escaped.
You escaped.
Well, you see, Father was concerned over my health. He wouldn't allow me to come back. But I wanted to do my duty toward the memory of my husband. I am at your disposal, Mr. Flint.
I can only express my deepest appreciation, Mrs. Faulkner. If you will take a seat, we will be with you in a little while.
Thank you.
You were telling us about Miss Andre's attitude toward Faulkner's marriage.
I said she keeps silent. But I hear her crying one night after marriage. Crying, sobbing, and not the first and only time in her life.
Did she seem to suffer much?
Suffer? No, not her. One man more or less make no much difference to her. I seen her unfaithful on the night of Beth Faulkner's wedding.
Unfaithful? Who?
I don't know the man. I seen the first time of the wedding of Bjorn Faulkner.
Tell us about it.
I go to wedding. Heart is beautiful. My poor Bjorn so handsome. And the bride all white and obviously. I cry like looking at my own children. But she not go to wedding.
Did Miss Andre stay at home?
She stay home. I come back early. I come in servant's door. She not hear me come. She was home, but she was not alone.
Who was with her?
He was, the man, out on the roof in the garden. It was dark, but I could see. He held her in his arms, and I think he wanted to crush her bones. And then he bent her back so far, I think she fell into a reflection in the pool. And then he kissed her lips, and I think he never get his lips off hers.
And then?
She step aside and say something. I cannot hear. She speak very soft. He not say a word. He just take her hand and kiss it, so long I get tired of waiting and go back to my room.
Did you learn the name of that man?
No.
Did you ever see him again?
Yes. Once.
And that was?
The 9th of January, 16th.
Tell us about it, Miss Svensson.
Well, she very strange that day. She tell me I have rest of day off. I've been suspicious.
Why did that make you suspicious?
My day off is Thursday, and I not ask for a second. So I said I don't need day off. She says she not need me, so I go.
What time did you go?
About 4 o'clock, but I want to know secret. I come back.
When did you come back?
About 10 at night. It was dark, she not home, so I wait. Half hour after, I hear them coming, but I see a Faulkner is with her, so I afraid to stay. But before I go, I see 2 gentlemen with them. One gentleman, he drunk, I not know him.
Did you know the other one?
The other one. He was tall and lanky and had light eyes. He was the one I seen kissing Miss Andre.
That's all, Miss Svensson.
Oh, just a minute, Miss Svensson. You still have to have a little talk with me.
For that, I say all I know.
You may know the answers to a few more questions. Now, you said you had seen that stranger kissing Miss Andre?
Yes, I did.
And it was dark, the night you saw her for the first time?
Yes, it was dark.
And on the night of January 16th, when you were so ingeniously spying on your mistress, you saw her come in with Faulkner and hurried to depart in order to not be caught. Am I correct?
You have good memory.
You just had a swift glance at the 2 gentlemen?
Yes.
Well, can you tell us what the drunken gentleman looked like?
How could I? No time to note his face in too dark a door.
So, it was too dark, and you were in a hurry, and yet you were able to identify a man you had seen but once before?
Let me tell you, lady, I am under oath, as you say, and I am a religious woman who respect oath. But I say it is the same man, and I say it again.
Thank you, Miss Svensson. That'll be all.
Mrs. Faulkner,
Mrs. Faulkner? You solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
What is your name?
Nancy Lee Faulkner.
Were you related to the late Bjorn Faulkner?
I was his wife.
I realize how painful this is to you, Mrs. Faulkner, and I appreciate your courage, but I'm going to have to ask many questions that will awaken sad memories.
I am ready, Mr. Flint.
When did you first meet Bjorn Faulkner?
In August of last year,
Where did you meet him?
at a ball given by my friend Sandra Van Rensselaer in Newport.
Will you kindly tell us about it, Mrs. Faulkner?
I remember Sandra introduced us. She said, "Here's a tough one for you, Nancy. I wonder whether you'll add this scalp to the well-known collection." Sandra always insisted on exaggerating my popularity. But I danced with him that night. We danced in the garden, under the trees, and stopped on the edge of a pool. We were alone in the darkness with the faint sound of the blue Danube waltz filling the silence. And I remember Mr. Faulkner reached up to pick a rose for me, and as he tore it down, his hand brushed my bare shoulder. And I don't know why, but I blushed. He noticed it immediately and apologized, smiling graciously. And then he took me back to the guests. I think we both felt a silent understanding that night, for we did not dance again with each other.
When did you see Mr. Faulkner again?
3 days later, I invited him to dine at my home on Long Island. Just an informal little dinner with Father as my chaperone. It was a real Swedish meal, and I cooked it myself.
Did you see him often after that?
Yes, quite often. His visits became more and more frequent until the day.
Until the day...
The day he proposed to me.
Please tell us about it, Mrs. Faulkner.
We went driving, Mr. Faulkner and I, alone. It was a beautiful day with a bright, cold sunshine, and I was driving my car, and I felt so young, so happy that I grew reckless. I'm sorry. It's a little hard for me to think of those days. I was reckless enough to lose my way. We stopped on a strange country road. I laughed and said, "We're lost. I've kidnapped you and I won't release you." He answered, "The ransom you want is not in circulation." Then suddenly he seized my hand and looking me straight in the eye, he said, "What's the use of pretending? I love you, Nancy."
I'm so sorry, Mrs. Faulkner. If you wish to be dismissed now and continue tomorrow...
Thank you, but I'm all right. I can go on. It was then I first learned about the desperate state of Mr. Faulkner's fortune. He said that he had to tell me the truth, that he could not ask me to marry him when he had nothing to offer me in return. But I loved him, so I told him that money had never meant anything to me.
Did Mr. Faulkner feel hopeless about the future when your engagement was announced?
No, not at all. He said that my faith in him and my courage helped him so much. I told him that it was our duty to save his enterprises, our duty to the world he had wronged, not to ourselves. I made him realize his past mistakes, and he was ready to atone for them. We were entering a new life together, a life of unselfish devotion to the welfare and service of others.
Did you remain in New York after your wedding?
Yes, we made our home in my Long Island residence. Mr. Faulkner gave up his New York penthouse.
Did Mr. Faulkner tell you of his relations with Miss Andre?
No, not then. But he did, 2 weeks after the wedding. He came to me and he said, "Dearest, there is a woman." Oh, excuse me. There was a woman, and I feel I must tell you about her. And I said, "I know it. You needn't say another word if you'd rather not, dear."
What did Mr. Faulkner tell you?
He said, "Karen Andre is the cause and the symbol of my darkest years. I am going to dismiss her."
What did you answer?
I said that I understood him and that he was right. But, I said, we must not be cruel. Perhaps there is another position you can find for Miss Andre.
He therefore dismissed Miss Andre voluntarily of his own choice.
Mr. Flint, there are two kinds of women in this world, and my kind is never jealous of the other.
What was Mr. Faulkner's business situation after your marriage?
I'm afraid I don't understand much about business, but I do know that Father made a loan, a very large loan, to my husband.
Mrs. Faulkner, will you tell us whether you think it possible that your husband had any reason to commit suicide?
I think it totally impossible.
Did he ever speak of his plans for the future?
We used to dream of the future, together, even on the night before his death. We were sitting in a study by the fire, talking about the years ahead. We knew that we would not be wealthy for a long time. We were planning to have a modest little home with a bright kitchen and a little flower garden. We'd be so happy there, just the two of us, until we had little ones to take care of.
And this was on the night of January 15th, the day before his death.
Yes.
What did Mr. Faulkner do on the day of January 16th?
He spent it in town on business as usual. He said that he had to attend a business banquet in New York that night and that he would not be home for dinner. He left at about 6 o'clock.
What banquet was Mr. Faulkner supposed to attend?
He didn't tell me and I didn't ask. I made it a point never to interfere with his business.
Did you notice anything peculiar when he said goodbye to you that night?
No, not a thing. He kissed me and said he tried to come home early. I stood at the door and watched him drive away, thinking of how happy we were, of what a perfect dream our love had been, like a delicate idol, like... I didn't know that our beautiful romance would, indirectly, through jealousy, bring about his death.
Your Honor, we object. Move that be stricken out.
The witness's last sentence may go out.
Thank you, Mrs. Faulkner. That is all.
Will you be able to answer a few questions now?
As many as you wish, Miss Stevens.
You said that your romance was like a perfect dream, didn't you?
Yes?
A sacred trough that regenerated a soul?
Yes.
A beautiful, uplifting romance based on mutual trust?
Yes.
Then why did you hire a detective to spy on your husband?
I didn't hire a detective to spy on my husband. I hired him to protect Mr. Faulkner.
Will you kindly explain that?
Well, you see, some time ago, Mr. Faulkner had been threatened by a gangster. Gus Reagan, I believe they called him that. Mr. Faulkner did not pay any attention to it. No one could intimidate him. And he refused to hire a bodyguard. But I was worried. So as soon as we were married, I hired Mr. Van Fleet to watch him. I did it secretly because I knew Mr. Faulkner would object.
How could a sleuth, following at a distance, protect Mr. Faulkner?
Well, I heard that the underworld has a way of finding out these things, and I didn't think they would attack a man who's constantly watched.
So all Mr. Van Fleet had to do was watch Mr. Faulkner?
Yes.
Mr. Faulkner alone?
Yes.
Not Mr. Faulkner and Miss Andre.
Miss Stevens, that supposition is insulting to me.
I haven't noticed you sparing any insult.
Well, I'm sorry, Miss Stevens. I assure you that was not my intention.
Now, Mr. Faulkner told you he never wanted to see Miss Andre again?
Yes, he did.
And yet he called on her after his marriage. He called on her often and at night. But your detective told you that, didn't he?
Yes, I knew it.
How do you explain it?
I cannot explain it. How can I know what blackmail she was holding over his head?
How do you explain the fact that he lied to you about the business banquet on the night of January 16th and went directly to Miss Andre's house?
If I could explain that, Miss Stevens, I might be able to spare you the bother of this trial, and we'd have an explanation for my husband's mysterious death. All I know is that she made him come to her house for some reason which he could not tell me, and that he was found dead that night.
Mrs. Faulkner, I want you to answer one more question.
Yes.
I want you to state here under oath that Bjorn Faulkner loved you.
Bjorn Faulkner was mine.
That's all.
No. That's not all.
Ask her one more question, Stevens.
What is it, Miss Andre?
Ask her whether she loved him.
I did, Miss Andre.
Then how can you speak of him as you did? How can you sit here and lie about him when he can't come back and defend himself?
I won't stand for it. Why should I be questioned by the murderess of my husband?
That's all.
I'm so sorry, Mrs. Faulkner.
The court will now adjourn until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
One of us is lying, and we both know which one.